Hello, today we're going to be talking about why neuroscientifically there's no such thing as casual sex. Doesn't mean that you can't have casual sex. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm telling you is that there is still a bonding process that happens at a neurological level. So if you've ever wondered why you're just not the type of person that can do that, why you're not the type of person that can engage in casual relationships, then you have to watch this. Guys, welcome back to another episode of Mental Currency with Nicole Vignola. So the first thing I'd like to say is that your brain treats sex like a bonding experience. Whether it's casual or not, there's always going to be an emotion involved. Sometimes it's to numb things out, sometimes it's to gain reciprocation from the other person, and sometimes we end up falling for them. But even if you're somebody who thinks that they can have casual sex, you're still probably feeling something, but you may just be really good at repressing it. This is valid for both men and women. The only difference is that women tend to have higher emotional awareness in the moment, whereas men tend to feel emotions a lot later. They have a delayed response. Even if an individual doesn't want to be with you or you feel like you don't fancy somebody, there's still going to be an emotion involved, even if it's not a positive one that is associated with romance. Now, sex activates our brain in ways that no other activity does. And it activates simultaneous brain areas and a simultaneous cocktail of emotions and cocktail of neurotransmitters, predominantly oxytocin and vasopressin. Now, oxytocin is responsible for determining who is part of your in-group and who is part of your out-group. Vasopressin is released more in men, and vasopressin is that kind of hormone that tells you that something belongs to you or not. And it's the reason why jealousy can start creeping in when you're having casual relations with other people, because that vasopressin is responsible for protection. Vasopressin is responsible for pair bonding and protective instincts towards your sexual partner. So you can see how after a period of time and engaging in casual sex with somebody, it can usually lead to a feeling of ownership. And in that feeling of ownership, gets manifested in a feeling of jealousy and envy, or a deep need for reciprocation, which can start to make you feel like you're going crazy. Other neurochemicals involved will be dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, all responsible for basically creating a neurological bond to the person. When we engage in something that is enjoyable, like sex with somebody, what that does is it releases dopamine. Dopamine is a reward-based learning neurochemical that tells your brain what you did to get that reward. Let's do it again. And so neurologically, you become bonded to this person. Point number 2 is that the body does keep the score. And what I mean by this is that sex isn't just neurological, it's also physiological. When we're intimate with somebody, our heart rate aligns, our breathing aligns, and our hormones align as well. What happens is that your brain and body create predictive models around them. So that is why you start to enjoy the way that they smell. You start to enjoy how they look at you. You start to enjoy how they touch you. And your brain creates this predictive model. So when they are then removed from the predictive model, it can be quite taxing to the brain and the physiology. This can trigger a withdrawal, a little bit like coming off of a drug. It's the same feeling as when somebody pulls away or when we're going through a breakup. That constant push and pull can leave us feeling a particular way because our brain and our physiology has created this predictive model around this person being around us. Our body quite literally enjoys them being around, and our brains become rewired in a way that predicts them being in the picture. Point number 3 is that sex activates our attachment system. So we gain these attachment styles during childhood depending on our caregivers. So we all have a different type of attachment style. However, I would also like to note our attachment styles can change depending on who we are with and depending on the situation and depending on where we are in life. If you have one particular learned attachment style, perhaps a more anxious attachment style, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is static forever, that that is exactly how you will be forever. However, talking about a situation that is extremely vulnerable like this one, our most predominant attachment style does tend to creep in. If you're somebody that shuts down when it comes to emotions, you may start pushing people away. That's a classic avoidant attachment style. If you're somebody that's more inclined to have an anxious attachment style where you need reassurance, you're worried about losing somebody and you keep wanting to hold on, this tends to creep in more when we're in a situation that is unstable because we start to seek for reassurance in particular scenarios. And when we can't get it, it can actually trigger our amygdala, our anterior cingulate cortex, and other parts of the brain that are responsible for interpreting whether this person is going to be soothing for you or not. Anxious types may feel like they need reassurance afterwards, and avoidance may feel like they are repelled or detached. Now, the biggest problem comes in when you have an anxious attachment joining in with an avoidant attachment, and you create this kind of push-pull dynamic. The more the anxious person leans in, the more the avoidant person leans out, and it creates this kind of nasty cycle where the person that needs reassurance keeps pushing the person that is avoidant away. Now, when the avoidant person comes back in, it reinforces the anxious person needing the reassurance. And so this kind of like bonding happens. And it's a negative type of bonding because it's unhealthy. There's this kind of push and pull, which keeps the people stuck together. And even though you think that it's not creating an emotional attachment to some degree, it still is, even though it is negative. So even though you think that you're having casual sex, this is not casual. It's triggering very deep-rooted belief systems in either party, and it's making both parties behave in a particular way that is still evoking an emotion, even though it is not the romantic one that everyone assumes that sex should lead to. Point number 4 is that we get something called post-sex cognitive dissonance. So when our brain and bodies are saying bond, but cognitively we're saying casual, there's this kind of internal conflict that starts to happen. This activates the part of the brain that is responsible for error detection called the anterior cingulate cortex. This area of the brain essentially starts to realize that there's a mismatch in expectations and internal conflict starts to happen because the brain wants to course correct and find a solution to this problem. And so your brain starts to try and rationalize it, but your physiology is saying something completely different. And this can leave us in a spiral where we start to overthink. And it might transpire in different ways. If you're somebody who has an avoidant attachment style, you may start to overthink it in a way that you need to probably break it off. But then you go back in and then you need to break it off and you go back in. And the anxious person is going to start overthinking the fact that maybe they said something or they should be behaving in a particular way. And it starts to create this internal conflict where we have this kind of moral disagreement with ourselves all of the time. That is not good for our psyche. It is actually quite detrimental to argue with ourselves on a daily basis, on a recurring basis. So the last point I want to make is that this is not about morality, okay? This is just for you guys to understand what is going on in your brain. I'm not telling you whether you should or shouldn't do it. That is not my job. My job is to explain to you what is going on in your brain so that you can start to understand why you feel a particular way when these kind of things happen. My aim is to explain the brain to make life feel a little bit less scary so that you can navigate everyday life. I hope you found this helpful. Maybe send it to a friend who keeps finding themselves in this situation. Please like, comment, and subscribe. You'll be helping the channel grow.